Hi, today I'm going to talk about floral biology and flower visitors of cocoa. Why are we interested in cocoa pollination? In recent decades, the demand for cocoa has grown, and currently there is a deficit and a growing deficit of cocoa production. Production that has also been lowered by climate change in those dry African countries. Not only is it of economical importance, but also of social importance, as more than 50 million people around the world depend on cocoa for their livelihood. We will show you that there is a direct connection between cocoa production and cocoa pollination. There was an experiment done in 2010 on cocoa pollination. Flowers were hand pollinated to different proportions, either 10% of the flowers or 100% of the flowers. What was shown is that an increment from 10 to 40% was significantly different, and then pollination is very important for the production. It didn't matter the fertilizer regime or the dry regime, but most importantly was the pollination level. More recently, a study in Sulawesi, Indonesia, showed that either partial hand pollination or full hand pollination increased not only the production of cocoa, but also the income of the farmer. So I hope I made clear that there is a direct connection between pollination and production. We can increase production by increasing pollination. Let us talk some about the cocoa flower. Cocoa flower has 5 whorls of organs, including staminodes. But I'm going to take a little minute of your time to talk about the petal shape. Petals are cuculate at the base, and this portion is important because in this hood is where the stamens stay, in a way that when anthers open and release the pollen stays in the hood. That is very important when we talk about visitors, flower visitors, and their potential as pollinators. What do we know or what do we think we know about pollination in cocoa? Studies back to the 1940s showed that flies of the genus Forcipomia were the main pollinators of cocoa. That has not been questioned by many researchers since then, in a way that most of what is done is evaluate different substrates for their potential as breeding sites for Forcipomia flies. More recently, researchers have started to question if flies are really the only pollinators of cocoa. For that, flower visitors were sampled using glue in more than one study, and then evaluate what were the visitors to wild cocoa and cultivated cocoa. These studies showed that Hymenoptera were more abundant on cocoa flowers than Diptera. In a recent review by Toledo Martinez, he showed that in the world, most flower visitors were of the order Diptera. However, it's important to notice that in South America, there is still a very large proportion of flower visitors that are from the order Hymenoptera. Our study was done in a small town in Colombia where the livelihood of the people depends much on cocoa. We work with the youth to promote cultivation of cocoa for the future generations. We focus on 3 different aspects: floral biology, flower visitors during the day and night, and plantations near and far from forest, and finally, and very importantly, the difference between visitors and pollinators. We followed about 100 flowers to follow the opening time of each one of them. And then we monitor over 500 flowers to understand when was pollen release, what was the viability, and also stigmatic receptivity. I would like to highlight the morphological differences between immature structure and mature structures. Here is a stamen that has not released the pollen yet, and here is an anther that has already released the pollen. Below we see the pistil, an immature pistil that is green in color, and the trichomes are clear in contrast with a mature pistil that has red coloration. What we found is flowers open for 3 days. In the first night, it's the opening of the flower, followed by the male phase, and the next day, the female phase. And lastly, there is the dehiscence. This is a time-lapse video of the opening of the flower. You can see how movements occur during the night to prepare the flower for the activities during the day. Now the flower is completely open. So to complement the flower biology study, we also studied floral visitors. For that, we visited 4 plantations near the forest and 3 plantations far from the forest. In each plantation, we sampled from 7 consecutive days, each day 4 time periods, and at each period 2 hours of sampling. Insects were collecting if they were on the flowers. So students were very diligent in observing the flower and collecting insects that were on the flowers, for a total of 3,868 records of about 61 species of insects. What can we say about the difference of floral visitors throughout the day? Well, we can see that there is more species diversity and abundance of visitors during the day compared to the night, that the most diverse and abundant order of visitors is the Hymenoptera. Diptera are lone species by high in numbers, and Coleoptera are co-dominant during early hours of the night. Here we can see that both diversity and abundance of insects at night cannot be disregarded, and in future studies, afternoon and night hours need to be included if we want to understand pollination of cocoa more thoroughly. When we compare floral visitors on plantations near and away from the forest, we can see that Hymenoptera are both species rich and abundant in all scenarios. However, diptera are abundant and especially abundant in farms that are away from the forest. Well, not all flower visitors are pollinators. For example, this strip here visits the male parts, but it's so small that it will not move to another flower. Forsythia often visited other flower parts that were not the female and male part. Ants were seen several times predating on flowers, and aphids were seen on the outside of the flowers. Now let's talk about real potential pollinators as this melipon bee. It collected pollen, but it also had pollen in other parts of their body like the abdomen. So this bee, we think, is a potential pollinator because it actually collected much pollen in its body and could pass it on to another flower. Well, you may remember I told you the importance of the petal hood, or that cuculate portion at the base of the petal. Well, much of the pollen is released in that hood, and many interactions of insects occur while insects come and visit the flowers, even if they do not visit the male and female plants. But because pollen is in that hood, visitors that shake the flower can also be important in dispersing the pollen. So I talked about the 61 species of insects that visit cocoa flowers in the area of study. There are 11 of those species that actually were observed carrying pollen. Among those, there was one melipon bee that carried all the time more than 50 grains of pollen, visited female and male plants, moved between trees, and was present in all plantations. We think that this is the most probable pollinator of cocoa in our region of study. Flower visitors come 24 hours a day, although most visits occur during the morning and afternoon. Proximity to forest is important as more diverse insects visit cocoa flowers in farms near forest. Hymenoptera and diptera are both important cocoa flower visitors. Hymenoptera by diversity and diptera by abundance. There are many beneficial interactions of insects that visit flowers because much of the pollen falls in the petal hood that, when visitors come, can be shaken and dispersed to other flowers. We have shown you evidence to make us believe that in our region, melipon bees are the main pollinator of flowers, of cocoa flowers, and not Forsythia flies as has been thought for many years. Thanks a lot for your attention. I'll be open to any question either during the conference or later.